Today we're going to talk about economic growth, how nations can improve their standard of living. As the slide shows, the nations of East Asia have rapidly improved their standard of living, defined as real GDP per person. How have they managed to do this? How do economies grow wealthier and improve their standard of living? We're going to look at two scenarios that are often suggested as ways for economies to improve their standard of living: growing the labour supply and growing labour productivity. Now, real GDP growth does contribute to improving our standard of living. But our standard of living can really only improve if we actually produce more goods and services with each hour of labour. Let's have a look at growing labour supply. If the population increases, then we're going to have a larger labour force, and labour supply curve will shift to the right. The result of this will be that the real wage actually falls, while aggregate hours worked increase. If we look at the previous diagram of the labour market, we notice that when the labour supply curve shifts to the right, we have an increased number of hours worked of 30 billion. We can then look at the current slide, which has the production function. The production function relates numbers of hours worked to real GDP. For example, 30 billion hours worked translates into $1.8 trillion of real GDP. What has been the overall effect of increasing labour supply? Well, the number of hours worked has increased from 20 billion to 30 billion hours, an increase of 50%. At the same time, the real wage rate has fallen. How much extra output have we obtained from working these additional hours? 50% extra hours has only translated into an increase in real GDP of approximately 10%. Let's now have a look at the growth of labour productivity. What is labour productivity? Well, it's the quantity of real GDP produced by a worker with 1 hour of labour. The formula then is labour productivity equals real GDP divided by the total number of hours worked, or aggregate hours. What is the effect of an increase in labour productivity on the labour market? Well, labour productivity is the concern of firms, and firms are represented by the demand curve for labour. When labour productivity increases, firms want to hire more of these new, highly productive workers, and the demand curve for labour moves to the right. The consequence is the real wage increases and the number of hours worked also increases. What does an increase in labour productivity do to the production function? Well, each production function assumes a constant or fixed labour productivity. So when labour productivity improves, the production function moves upward. So the new number of hours worked, 24 billion, then translates into $2.2 trillion of GDP. So what has been the effect of an increase in labour productivity? Well, the real wage has increased and the number of hours worked has increased by 20%, but 20% extra hours worked has increased real GDP by almost 40%. So how did the nations of Southeast and East Asia increase their standard of living to that of advanced nations such as the United States over the past 60 years? Well, countries such as Singapore have ensured that through increased attention to education and training, that their workers have become more productive, able to produce more output in an hour that has not only enriched the society by boosting total GDP, but has also increased real GDP per person, the basis of the standard of living.